NATO has done very little to defend Greenland, and that's in the face of growing evidence of Russian intervention in that area. Russian submarines go through the straits and they need to be kept track of. So he was right in the sense of saying, hang on a minute, we America need to have Greenland to be able to defend it properly. The European part of NATO were not putting in enough cash, not enough military resources to do it. So hence, he's pressed another button. And in his way of dealing with things, which is as a property developer, as far as Greenland's concerned, Trump seems to have gone too far in his first opening statement. He was right to say Greenland needs defending. But instead of saying that what he's borrowed on is the past history of the United States wanting to get Greenland, will he go further? I think that's up to the European nations to stand firm.
Welcome. As we record this, I am certain that you know the world has crossed the threshold, not gradually, certainly not politely, but evidentially. Today, allies are being spoken about as liabilities. Enemies are being treated like partners. The language of occupation is back on the table, not as a history lesson, but as policy-adjacent suggestions. The world, especially Europe, feels it viscerally. So here's the real question, and it's not a comfortable one. Has the post-war order finally sort of expired? And if it has, are we prepared for what replaces it? Or are we still pretending that the treaties written in a different century will restrain the 21st century power? In a moment, we'll examine those questions with someone who didn't just study that world from the outside, but operated within it from the highest possible levels as the highest position of leadership inside the British intelligence agencies of MI5 and MI6. But first, welcome to the Dov Baron Show. Come for the stories, stay for the upgrade in meaning. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I work with elite leaders and organizations who are quietly and positively moving the trajectory of industries and even entire nations. My work is in helping you diagnose and rewire your emotional source code so you can stop unconsciously leading from your nervous system and more fully leading from truth, meaning, and purpose. And that alters everything from your vision, your values, your worthiness, and even your biology. Now, if you're old enough, you will remember the Cold War not as some metaphor, but as the background hum of existential threat. I certainly do. In 1989, the wall fell, the Berlin Wall. And shortly thereafter, the Soviet Union kind of dissolved. And we told ourselves a comforting story that history had learned its lesson. It hadn't. Russia kept its weapons, power consolidated, authoritarianism didn't retreat, it evolved. Fast forward to now, over a decade of democratic decline worldwide. Authoritarianism, well, the confidence in that has risen, and former adversaries appear far more aligned than our collective memory is possibly comfortable with admitting. Behind all of this, beyond elections and speeches, there has always been another layer. Intelligence agencies, operating in silence, sharing what could not be said publicly, watching what most of us just never even see. It's a world few truly understand, and those who do are just beginning to explain it to you and me. If you're here on this show for comfort, this isn't your place. But if you're the kind of leader who values depth over dopamine, hit that subscribe button right now. This is where your assumptions will get stress tested, not soothed. Some of what you'll hear will challenge your beliefs, and those beliefs are the beliefs that may have been sort of capping your potential. It may sometimes be uncomfortable, but that's usually where real results begin. Which brings us back to today's guest. Famous spy thriller authors like John le Carrier knew that world because he lived it. So did James Bond's creator, Ian Fleming. Their fiction worked because it was anchored in truth, moral ambiguity, loyalty under pressure, and the psychological cost of power. Our guest today comes from that same lineage, not as a novelist first, but as a practitioner. David Bickford is the former Undersecretary of State and Legal Director of the British intelligence agencies MI5 and MI6. He spent his career in the cold waters of terrorism, espionage, and organized crime. and was among the first to recognize that threat long before it became obvious. He was awarded the Champion Order of Bath for his work and today applies those hard-earned insights in preventing the next wave of global destabilization. Ladies and gentlemen, please turn up the volume and help me to welcome former director of British intelligence agencies MI5 and MI6 and the author of a 3-book female spy series that you have just got to read. You'll hear more about that in a bit. Ladies and gentlemen, David Bickford. Welcome, David.
Thanks very much for having me, Dov. Good to see you.
Good to have you back, man. Really is. I am excited for this conversation because, as you know, you and I both keep our sort of fingers on the pulse of what's going on in global politics. And in the intro, I said that you use your hard-earned insights to prevent the next wave of global destabilization. However, since Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, which we talked about last time, the personal relationship between the US president and Vladimir Putin, alongside the friction of NATO as it applies, has raised all kinds of questions around alliances and whether those shared values are still anchored or merely transactional power. From your experience, how dangerous is it when the personal psychology, in this case admiration, begins to outweigh institutional discipline at a global security level of decisions?
Well, talking about keeping a finger on the pulse of change at the moment, I think the pulse is so rapid now, it's quite difficult to keep control.
It's like keeping your finger on the pulse of somebody who's been taking meth.
I think it's very easy at the moment to be very nervous about what is going on. A lot of people ascribe it to the years before the Second World War, the sort of disintegration of the order of things, as it were. On the other hand, I think that we can still look NATO as being the defense pocket against Russia, the possibility of China. That is still coherent, but it's in the process of change. I think President Trump put his finger firmly on the button of the necessity of NATO when he said that Europe had not been paying enough for its upkeep. That's absolutely right. I think defending the United Kingdom, which is my job, we had been keeping up our payments and keeping them at around 2%. But quite clearly, the 3% figure is essential. And therefore, he was right to say, come on, Europe, you have got to pay your way.
Mm-hmm.
The reaction to that was somewhat surprising because it took some time for Europe to actually come to the conclusion that he was right.
Yes.
So if you look at the reason why, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, and that is the pulse has quickened so fast that it's difficult to keep track of. NATO, in this particular instance, as the nations getting together, was still in the position of the old stage, oh, we need dozens of committees to sort this out. Each little bit needs to be analysed by a committee. There's no time for that anymore. President Trump also understands that life moves fast. His whole essence has been trading property. That is where you need to make fast decisions, and he's used to that.
I certainly agree with you with what you're saying about NATO and everybody paying in, and I think that everybody definitely leaned on America too much as the big brother who was going to take care of us. I get that, and I think that even people who were not Trump fans at all can see that now. Maybe they didn't see it at the time, but they see it certainly now. And I think a lot of people's opinions on both sides shifted around these things. I said, your insights are here to help make sure the world doesn't destabilize. But when Trump talks about attacking part of a NATO alliance, as in Greenland, what does that say to somebody like you with your intelligence understanding of how these things work?
Well, to me, and incidentally, all my opinions are my own.
Of course, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, they don't represent government opinion or anything. I sort of feel free to give my own opinion, particularly to you, because this is the way we operate. Greenland, again, Trump is absolutely right. NATO has done very little to defend Greenland, put any defenses in Greenland. And that's in the face of growing evidence of Russian intervention in that area. Russian submarines go through the straits and they need to be kept track of. Greenland is the essential place to do that.
Right.
So he was right in the sense of saying, hang on a minute, we America need to have Greenland to be able to defend it properly. Well, that was in the face of NATO, ex-United States, if you like, not doing enough to defend. The European part of NATO were not putting in enough cash, not enough military resources to do it. So hence, he's pressed another button.
Mm-hmm.
And in his way of dealing with things, which is as a property developer, if you like.
Brash might be another word.
Well, but it's certainly tough.
Right.
He sets a high bar before he starts negotiating. And in a sense, that can work in a property deal where you might be dealing with a weaker trader and you can frighten them off. But I think certainly in the sense of the original attack on NATO, NATO responded. The European part of NATO responded. As far as Greenland's concerned, Trump seems to have gone too far in his first opening statement. I don't think he needed to be as forthright as he has been. He was right to say Greenland needs defending.
Sure.
But instead of saying that, what he's borrowed on is the past history of the United States wanting to get Greenland anyway. They've made a number of offers to buy it.
Yes.
So he sort of upped the ante. Will he go further? I think that's up to the European nations to stand firm.
As an intelligence guy, you analyze situations, you saw situations. Do you think he will take Greenland? Because the truth of the matter is they have an agreement to put as many military sites there as they want. They had way more before. America moved a lot of its military off Greenland. Now, of course, European parts of NATO are getting in there and doing their thing, but he's still pushing hard for that. Do you think he will invade?
It's an opinion. I don't think he will. No. I think, again, the situation is that what he wants is NATO to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
We turn around to him and say, well, you can't have Greenland. It can defend itself, and we're all in it together to defend it. But he knows that the major part of the defense cash input, if you want to put it that way, is going to come from America. He wants the Europeans to do their bit as well.
Right.
And in my own opinion, this is his standard attack, or attack dog, if you like, to get the Europeans to face up to their responsibilities.
Do you think that that's the same with Canada? Because he's been talking about having Canada become the 51st state. We already know what's happened with Venezuela. There's a threat against Cuba. There's a threat against Colombia. There's a threat against Mexico. And of course, Canada is the 51st state, which as we record this, he's brought to the surface again this morning.
Yeah.
You think it's the same thing?
That's a totally different matter. I think that's oil.
But Venezuela has heavy oil and it's too expensive to pull it out. That's why Exxon has said no. That's why a lot of the oil companies said you don't have the infrastructure there.
No, that's absolutely right. I do think that in terms of Venezuela, it was acceptable for Trump to say that Venezuela were actually attacking the United States by undermining it through a drugs warfare.
But there is no fentanyl coming out of Venezuela, and any of the cocaine was going to Europe, not going to America, that was being trafficked through there.
There was a lot of cocaine piling into America.
Not through Venezuela. Not through my research. And you might know better than me. I'm not saying differently. I'm just saying, as far as I know, and I did a lot of research on it, there was no cocaine coming into America through Venezuela. Venezuela actually does transport cocaine, but it goes actually to Europe. It doesn't go to America. There's a completely different path.
Okay, I think we may have to beg to differ on that one.
Okay, good. I'm all right with that. You know that.
if he has the intelligence to show that, and I think he probably has, then his attack on Maduro to bring him out to the United States follows the US extraterritorial jurisdiction, which they can exercise when they believe their own nation, as it were, is being put under threat.
Yes.
I just see that as being an excuse for taking out Maduro into the United States.
Yeah. I mean, I live in Canada.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I walked around thinking this could get very, very crazy very, very quickly, especially when you come out after doing that and start threatening Cuba and Colombia and Mexico. And Mexico's leader, of course, there's a lot of problems with cartels, but she's one of the stronger leaders of the G20 now. She's really done a lot for help her country. There's a lot of really great work being done there under her in a short period of time. Of course, there's all kinds of conspiracies on every side of these things, obviously. You were warning about the rise of international terrorism before it became politically undeniable.
Yes.
Looking back, where did institutions misread the signal? Because I think there's a lot for us to learn here. Looking back, where did they misread those signals, and where did they actively choose not to see it before the truth was, well, inconvenient?
I think states don't like to have to respond to problems until they have all their ducks in a row. They don't like to go off half-cocked, certainly the democracies. They need to be quite certain what they're about to do before they do it.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the intelligence about terrorism coming from the international community was there to be read.
Mm-hmm.
States were slow to pick it up because institutionally they are slow.
Yes.
They have committees. They have departments that have infighting. Democracy doesn't move quickly.
But do you think that they were actively choosing not to see things that were obviously very clear to you and you were pointing out to them? And I'm not just talking about British intelligence. I want to be clear. I'm talking about international.
I think the intelligence agencies knew what was going on, but it goes to this sort of sluggishness within Western democracy, the parliamentary system, and the bureaucracy that can hold things up. I think it was that far more than any sort of, oh no, we don't want to know about this, we're going to put our heads in the sand. You see the UK response to President Trump over Greenland. It's not, oh no, we're going to rush off and counter with our own embargo on his goods. It's, let's sit down and talk about this sensibly and calmly. That's the UK approach to things. We do not like to be rushed. We need to sort of chew over the cud, if you like.
Well, Starmer had said that in the last report before we record. But at the same time, from a psychology point of view, you're not dealing with somebody who operates like that. You have to adapt to the person you're dealing with. You know this from the spy agencies very well, that if you approach everybody the same way, you're dead in the water. You've got to adapt to who you're dealing with. There's a guy here who you may be familiar with, has a TV show called Bill Maher. He's more liberal, and he went and talked to Trump at the White House. He's invited, and he went and had dinner with Trump. And people gave him a lot of shit for that, for being willing to do that. And I actually thought it was a good idea. I agreed that you need to go talk to people, whatever side you're on. But you also, and this is the part that I think he was missing, you have to know who you're dealing with, not with the presentation of who you're dealing with, but you have to have the understanding psychologically you're dealing with. And so when Bill Maher went there, he didn't have that any more than when Starmer's saying, well, we need to have a rational conversation. You're not having a conversation with somebody who operates like that. And if you do, you're going to miss a lot because you're operating from your biases over who am I dealing with.
I get that. I understand exactly what you're saying. But there are ways of having a conversation. You can have a conversation by laying all your cards out on the table and pleading, which isn't the way to deal with President Trump.
No.
Or you can have a conversation where you lay your cards out on the table and say no. This isn't going to happen because we within the European part of NATO are actually not going to allow this to happen. President Trump may very well turn around and say, well, what about military force to take over Greenland? Is he really going to say that? Is he authoritarian enough to say that? Does he have the support of the country to say that? Does he have the support of the country to actually defy a NATO ally when they say we need to talk about this in a rational manner?
What's your thought?
I don't think he would say to himself that he has the support of the country to do that. We have a lot of friends in America. On the whole, they're not warlike. They don't want to go to war. The whole panoply of America derives largely from Europe. Let's face it, that relationship remains strong, even though we shout at each other. Of course we do. It's very healthy. It's family. But I think that holds the United States together. Has that changed? Has the United States, under President Trump, decided, no, we're no longer democratic enough to talk to our European forefathers? We are authoritarian enough to go to war with them? I don't believe that's the case.
I really hope you're right. My concern is at a psychological level because, again, of who this person is. This weekend, you may know that the leader of Denmark shared a text that he got from Trump basically saying, I'm pissed off that I didn't get the Peace Prize. I ended 8 wars, and now I'm maybe not going to be so peaceful. Are you 12 and pissed off that somebody stole your girlfriend? I put this in parentheses, not what we expect from a leader, but it's very evident that Trump is not the leader that America has had. We've had some very strong Democrats, some very strong Republicans. Trump is a different breed altogether. And it's very interesting to me watching the world maneuver around his next whim. Whether you're pro or anti-Trump is not relevant here. What's relevant here is how are we all responding to this? Because I think the danger is always not having an intelligent view and saying he's a madman or anything he does is right. I think either of those places don't really bring us to any level of solution.
I agree. You can put the argument easily the other way. I'm not defending Trump. I'm trying to sort of analyze how he might operate in terms of his background, which I don't think we should forget.
No.
It's been his way of dealing through his commercial life. And he doesn't see the difference.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I don't think there's any difference. For him, it's very simple. It's a negotiation-ish. That's a loose term, but it's about deals and it's about winning. And he loves winners and he doesn't like to lose.
No.
Understanding that primary driver in him is about winning. That makes a big difference. And as you said, that's from real estate.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the books, and there's a lot to talk about in there, but there's also a lot of other, obviously, global things we can talk about. But in your fiction, intelligence failures often hinge on human motive, and that's why I brought up the psychology stuff, rather than missing data. How much of that is artistic license? How much of that reflects the truth the public still resists about why states actually fail?
If the question relates to how is intelligence analyzed, is that right?
It's about how much of artistic license are you allowing, how much of it reflect the truth that the public still resists about the way states fail.
Okay. Intelligence is not about individuals going out doing their own thing.
No.
Quite simple. Intelligence also isn't about the whims of individuals within the organization, which is popular fiction. Intelligence is about teamwork in analysis. It's about training. It's about selection right at the beginning. Any individual who wants to go into the British intelligence agencies has his life stripped by the security department. They look into every aspect of their life before they're even hired. So somebody applies to MI5 or MI6 for a job. First of all, is this person the sort of person that might work? Then they are invited to apply. Then they will go through a very, very severe background check. Friends and relations are asked questions, all their bank accounts, their life is stripped apart.
Yep.
So that by the time they're actually hired, after a very severe interview process, those individuals are quite open. The agencies know who they are, how they operate, how they can operate under pressure, how they can analyze. Are they lateral thinking? Are they unbiased? Can they actually look at an individual or a problem from base, if you like?
Right.
Look down on it without prejudice. Absolutely essential. So here you have a team of people doing that, being supervised by other people who have been under that same selection procedure. And so the conclusions that are reached are pretty fine and pretty unbiased. I could say that without doubt because I was their legal advisor for a number of years and I worked very closely with them on operations and on their political negotiations with government. So those are the people that I dealt with, and it was very, very impressive. So no, shenanigans don't go on in order to present to governments a picture that appeals to them.
But at the same time, this emotional piece, which I just talked about, the internal motives of that person, the humanity of your character, your main character, Katya, how much of that turmoil is artistic license and how much of it is, when you discover, is the debrief of the individual from being out?
Yes. Katya and Lev in my new book are individuals who have the same emotions as any other person. And obviously, anyone who's recruited to intelligence agencies have their own emotions, but they are taught to control them.
Right.
In my fiction for Katya and Lev, those emotions are allowed to boil over. And that's the fun of writing about them.
Right.
And trying to persuade the readers that this actually happens, whereas in fact it doesn't. It is the essence of being able to write about those characters. One's trying to see how that sort of character would react in this particular situation, boiling over.
Right.
Rather than being calm and collected. Because if you wanted to write fiction about the intelligence agencies, then your readers would be bored stiff.
That is so cool to actually hear that when you think about, because we all love these shows that are about those kinds of things and there's all these emotional dynamics going on and we're all pulled in. The Night Manager is my new favorite. I love that show and all those kind of shows. I love them a lot, but it's like, if you strip the emotion out, it's like, okay, what am I watching?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
That's really fascinating.
I was asked after I first left the agencies to be the advisor on a spy TV program or series. And I was chatting with them about how we operate. And there was this sort of dull thud because that wasn't anything that they wanted to hear.
Do you watch Slow Horses?
Slow Horses, yeah. Mick Herron, his books are stunningly, absolutely brilliant, of course. And he's got the most wonderful characters, yeah.
I love Slow Horses. Gary Oldman's one of my favorite actors of all time anyway, but that character is so fantastic. But that is all these emotional characters and these brilliant arcs that are going on between them. And then that cold, sort of emotionless and very brash. It's like very well done.
It is very, very well done. So it's fun because you can see the sort of situations that arise and one can then let them flow out into areas where they wouldn't normally flow out within the agencies themselves.
And your character, Katya, has a background, I believe, as a ballerina, right?
Her mother was a ballerina, absolutely.
So her mother was a ballerina, and she's pulled between the two worlds.
Yes.
There's that artistic, creative, etc., and then this very sort of logical and linear. I want people to be able to find out more about the books. Tell us more about where people can find the books, how they can get a hold of them. I know you got something very special going on for the 1970s.
Yes.
And so tell people where they can find out more about you, about the books, etc., and then we can come back into what we're talking about.
Okay. Well, my website is davidbickfordcb.com, and that sets out who I am, and it also sets out the Katya trilogy, which were my first books that I wrote. And also, if they click on to Cold Protocol, which is my new book coming out in March.
Fabulous.
Funnily enough, in 1979, the period in which this book is written, in Berlin, when the Cold War was going on and the wall slides straight through the middle of Berlin, and on the west you have all the bright lights and freedom, and in the east you have the cold control of communism.
The Stasi.
Absolutely. In this one, we start off with two Americans in East Germany, and they're picked up by a Russian patrol and then chased by a Russian armored carrier. And we go to Lev Leviatsky, who's the Russian officer.
It was also featured in Katya.
Leviatsky is in Katya. Absolutely.
So it's kind of a backstory.
It's a backstory of Leviatsky's life in Berlin as the officer in charge of policy. He's a Polad, a political advisor. And on the border, he makes a very fast decision straight into the world of espionage, loyalty, love, and betrayal. It's very fast moving. I said to my publishers, look, in 1979, a book cost a $5. So why these years later should people actually have to stump up so much more to actually buy a book? And they came to the conclusion that for 500 readers, the first 500 readers, they would actually have a pre-publication price of £5.
That's fantastic.
Which is absolutely brilliant. So 500 readers can actually read this book for $5, which I thought was really good of them, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's really great.
So on the website, if you go to Cold Protocol, which is the name of the book, and you click on the coupon code Berlin 1979, which is easy to remember because that's when the book's set, Berlin 1979, there you go. You can have your book for $5.
Fantastic. So again, we'll make sure that that link is posted in the show notes just in case you didn't catch it. I don't know how much you can talk about this, but you can talk about it from a sort of 10,000-foot view. Many of us, like myself, who have been politically aware, that some of the stuff that was, quote, conspiracy is in fact real. I'm not saying that all conspiracies are real, of course not. We've got things in our present time, as we're recording this. You've got things like the protests in Iran. And we know about, because of stuff that's released under the, what's the name of that act now? I'm having some neurological flatulence, otherwise known as a brain fart. But we know, like, for instance, the CIA was involved in the removal of the Shah of Iran, et cetera, et cetera. When you see these kinds of things, are you ever asked for input from anybody on any side? Not talking about political sides, but in understanding from a news place or whatever it is, about things like that. Because Iran, the protests, they've now arrested Mossad officers, the CIA have been implicated, and actually through Danish intelligence, which I found very interesting. When you get asked about those kinds of things from a news place, from an insight place, how do you try and understand all that and then translate?
Well, I don't, because I've always made it a rule not to discuss any sort of operational or quasi-operational business. That's because I don't know.
No, of course.
All we sitting outside can do is watch social media, news bulletins, and media itself. All those sources aren't actually dealing directly within the intelligence community. They might be talking to people in the intelligence community, but unless they're talking to the highest level of the intelligence community, they're not going to get the real story. And even then, probably not.
Right.
It's all guesswork.
Right. But yours is informed guesswork. That's my point, is yours is highly informed guesswork. And so you're being asked for, theoretically, what do you feel is going on?
Yeah.
I'm not from the intelligence agency, but I am smart enough to work out that things aren't always what they appear to be.
Sure.
So you have an opinion that is far more informed about the way things work than most people who are left guessing, usually guessing wrong, as you point out.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. But even then, I'm applying that experience to a current situation where I don't know the facts.
Of course.
I mean, I said this before, with you in particular, that an informed guess is totally different to being informed on the actual facts. And the only way you can get the actual facts is you are part of the discussion or the problem or the intelligence collection. So the rest of it, even from me, with background in intelligence, is again sort of informed guesswork, but it's not a hell of a lot better, if you like, than the guesswork of yourself, because you're extremely experienced, you're a very good analyst, you understand the world, you have just as good a input with your experience as me in terms of the information you get.
I think you're being very generous.
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm sure this is the way you operate. You do not come on and say things unless you've had a very, very good understanding to the best of your ability.
Yes.
Of what it's all about.
Well, again, I think you're being very generous, and I appreciate that, and thank you. So as geopolitics certainly appears to be fragmenting into multipolar tensions, on top of that, you've got AI acceleration, misinformation.
Yes.
You've got these legal gray zones. Do intelligence agencies risk becoming guardians of stability or prisoners of legacy thinking?
No, I think they have always been guardians of stability. That's their job. Their job is to try and keep governments informed to the best of their ability. And that means cold analysis. That means stability. It means operating much faster than they used to. It means that they themselves have to use AI to assist analysis. It means they themselves are in the same position as the rest of us, determining what's fiction, what's being put out by some bad player.
Yes.
To try and mislead us, to try and influence elections, to try and influence economics, to try and influence trade deals, to try and split NATO, to try and split the EU. Sure. But they are in a much better position because their job is to find the facts and to assess what information they get the best of their ability. And because they're right in the heart of it, that gives them the ability to contain stability, or not, as the case may be, because there's always stuff that comes in from left field. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that there's also, and this is not about necessarily intelligence agencies or even governments, I see this at the business level when I'm dealing with these organizations too, is that there is a sense that modernization is somehow a threat, that desire to hold on to the old way of doing it in a world that is dramatically changed.
Mm.
Dramatically changed. Do you have a sense that modernization is perceived as a threat at a government level or even at an intelligence level? Do you think that they recognize that themselves? Because I know in business, oftentimes there's a blind spot there. They don't realize they're holding on to something that is actually dysfunctional.
No, certainly not. The people who are hired by the intelligence agencies, one of the main motivations for them is lateral thinking.
Right.
The ability to think outside the box, the ability to think forward.
Mm.
Now, if you go to your government advisors, if you like, the bureaucracy, their job is to advise as safely as possible. That doesn't promote forward thinking very much.
No.
And therefore, you have to rely on the few within bureaucracy who do think forward. And you also have to rely in a parliamentary democracy on ministers who also think forward. Now, big question mark on that.
They're not going through the same rigors as the intelligence.
They're not. No, they don't.
No, and some of them are a bit daft. Let's be honest.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that because we elect.
No, but I can. Some of them are a bit tick.
So on that point, yes.
No, I've pushed you into an uncomfortable corner. I apologize.
No, not at all. No, it's not uncomfortable. No, it's just I deny it.
I understand. Well, you've worked at the intersection of law and intelligence. And in today's environment, again, your opinion, your observation, does the law still function as a moral constraint? Or has it quietly become a strategic weapon used selectively by states and even courts alike?
I think the law's always been used to the best advantage. No doubt about that.
Right.
In terms of morals, I don't get it because I've never understood morals.
Right.
Because one man's moral is somebody else's sin. What I do understand is the balance of rights.
Right.
And the balance of rights has really been the same throughout history. There's always been a balance of rights. Whether or not they've been respected is a totally different matter. The United States Constitution has a balance of rights.
Mm-hmm.
The European Convention on Human Rights has a balance of rights. And it was very interesting that in the development of Russia,
Mm-hmm.
they pulled out of, were actually expelled from the European Convention on Human Rights because of the increasing transgressions in the Ukraine war.
Yep.
In a sense, balance of rights is essential, and that's how the intelligence agencies operate. The lawyers in the agencies are there to advise the officers on the balance of rights between the individual and the state. What is the balance?
So let's take that a bit deeper
Yeah.
regarding the European Court of Human Rights.
Yes.
Where do you believe the court protects civilization, and where does it unintentionally, maybe potentially, undermine those very societies that it aims to defend?
That is such a good point, and it's such a debatable point at the moment. The problem, I think, that lies within the European Court of Human Rights is in its constitution, rather like everything else, like a government or organization. It's the constitution. British judges, Canadian judges are very experienced. They've normally been at the coalface. They've normally been lawyers who have actually been in the business of practicing law.
Right.
On the street.
Yep.
Big learning curve, knocks the chips off.
Mm-hmm.
You soon abandon the grand concept because you understand how the law works on the street. Very important.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with the European Court is that a lot of the judges operate under the European system where your judge goes to university and then becomes a judge, doesn't go through the humdrum, tear at your throat life of the average lawyer.
No.
And a lot of them are also professors who've been to university and they lecture. Well, the problem with that is that because you don't have that background of having dealt with the street, you start to go into this sort of secluded area of high-flown thought. what is good for the people? Well, what is good for the people are two totally different things. In a lecturer's mind, it's one thing, a very high bar. In your average lawyer, it's a different bar altogether. It's trying to deal with the reality of life.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. And I'll tell you why it makes sense to me, because, as you know, I grew up in the UK, and I'm old enough that I remember Harold Wilson as the leader of the Labour Party, which would be considered the Democratic Party in North America. And I also remember Margaret Thatcher very well as the head of the Tories, or what might be called a Republican. The thing about both of those people were, the reason for their appeal is they came from the hard knocks.
Yeah.
Maggie Thatcher's dad owned a little corner shop. He was a business person, but he was in the street with the people. Harold Wilson and all the Labour Party had been union members.
Yep.
They'd been on the shop floor. And now it seems like, to me, what you're saying translates very well into politics. What the bloody hell does Trump know about politics? Nothing. He's from real estate. What the hell does Sumak, right?
Oh, yeah.
What does he know about stuff? He's got more money than the king. This is craziness. You don't understand, and you're trying to talk to the people about what people value, or you're the leader of France, you're Macron, hiding your expensive watch under the table and trying to take it off while trying to talk about people. This distance between where they're talking and the people who they're involved with. I think it's really an interesting piece of my analysis of what's happening. I've written a piece that is not published yet, but it's about how psychologically we're on the brink of a civil war, and we need to not have a civil war, that we need a revolution. And there's a distinction. A civil war is one group of working class against another group of working or middle class. And a revolution is saying, hold on a second, who's pinning us against each other? Because that's what happened in France. It was like, hold on a second, you're setting us at each other's throat. And we're listening to people who don't actually know what it's like to be on the ground, to go to the grocery store and buy a loaf of bread, or to work with blisters on their hands in a real sense. And so when you talk about the European courts in this way of being a judge in the European Rights Court, and you went to school and you became a professor, do you really have any experience of, as you said, that dogged fighting of what it really means?
As far as the court's concerned, it does create a standard that isn't reachable by the average, not in every case, but in certain areas, it's a standard that's not reachable by the ordinary citizen. And okay, fine, it's great to have aspirations, but when those aspirations outmatch the reality of life, then that's where you get your problems. What's interesting is with Russia, between 1985 and 2015, there was a real hope that the democracies could work with Russia.
Yes.
But the democracies pushed sophisticated democracy at Russia, pushed a number of the previous satellite states of the Soviet Union into the EU and also into NATO, which is a different animal because pushing it into NATO could be seen as a threat by Russia, certainly by Putin.
Well, it certainly breaks the Minsk agreement, right?
Yeah. And the question then was, did we push democracy too hard? Was it too sophisticated for Putin, for instance, who's imperialistic and autocratic, to get? Did it make it easier for him to create this idea that, no, the EU is not for us. Europe is not for us. And then you've shifted to the European Court of Human Rights, applying this massively high standard that even the European states themselves can't aspire to,
right,
onto a burgeoning democracy. Was it any surprise that at the end of the day, they withdrew or were taken out? In my opinion, no, it wasn't. I think it all went too fast. And it's going too fast for the European nations at the moment, as far as the European Court's concerned. And we do need to analyze that and change it.
What's the solution, David?
The solution is to interpret the decisions that are so far advanced that we can't make up. It's for each state to interpret those decisions according to their own constitutional network. We are all democracies within the European Union, Western democracies. We're not autocratic. There's no autocracy within Europe. You question that?
You have to question Hungary.
I wouldn't call that an autocracy.
You've got Hungary, you've got the rise in Poland, and you've got the rise of the right, generally speaking, in lots of countries in Europe.
Sure, that's because there is also an argument that the rise of the right is, again, because the aspirations of the ECHR, European Court of Human Rights, those aspirations are drifting down into aspirations that people, certainly on the right, can't adhere to. They see it as all too difficult. A lot of people see it as all too difficult. Can I say what I want to say?
Right.
European Court of Human Rights says, no. There are things you cannot say. We've been used to free debate, which is essential if we're going to get on. ECHR is beginning to shut down. This is where the right can attack.
This is very scary. When I look at what's going on in the US, and I don't think it's politically sane, personally, that's my opinion. But I look at it, most of my closest friends are American, and they're political on both sides. And I say to them, listen, no matter what side you're on, I understand where you are on the other side. And this is me. It's my opinion. It's not the truth. The shit that's happening in the UK of people being arrested for posting something on social media because they said something is like, that's nuts. People tend to move to opposites. They polarize rather than actually thinking things through. And so they go, well, you've got to be able to say whatever you want. Well, yeah, I get it, but within reason. But at the same time, more people were arrested in the UK for putting stuff on social media that was anti-government or anti-whatever, anti-policy than happened in Russia last year. That's nuts.
There was always a quite clear balance within the criminal law as to what you can say that is lawful and what you can't say, which is unlawful. There was always a balance.
Yes.
That balance has been skewed. You're absolutely right. And it's been skewed, in my own opinion, from the overarching European Court of Human Rights, which we have to adhere to, which has set this standard that is unrealistic. They do not understand that people want to talk. They want to discuss. And if you are shut up because you can't say things, then you start to get an underground bubble. You're absolutely right.
Right.
The far right and the far left, the extremists, take advantage of that.
Yeah, I fully agree. From my analysis, it's pretty simple. The far left feed the far right, and the far right feed the far left. And there's not much difference between the two. The sane political conversation is often what's really missing. Writing your books, and they're all set in the Cold War, writing those books, do you feel like those books address some of the things that have become so clear now?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about how they address that.
They address it in terms of the ambivalence that went on during the Cold War. What had to be done to protect the individual? Katya is a person who desperately wants to protect the values that she has inculcated from her mother.
Right.
Which is art, life, but she was bred by her father, who was hard KGB, to dismiss that. And so she has this internal conflict all the time. If I send someone out on an operation, when they're killed, is it all right to cry for them? Or that's wrong. And there's the internal conflict of, did I do something wrong, between that sort of background of her mother and the background of her father. That's sort of a euphemism, if you like, for ordinary everyday work.
We're all dancing on that moral high beam of trying to work out what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that that's also one of the great dangers. If you make everything right or everything wrong, then you're in a cult. It's very simple. So the fact that your books address that, even though the agents in real world wouldn't have to live out those things, you're giving them that expression, because I think that's something we all have to address within our daily lives. You can be a Trump supporter, for instance, and go, what's happening to people who are brown being pulled off the street, and go, that's not right, even though you want the border secure.
Yeah.
It's like you and I talked about this last time. One of the great missing things in our society today is that we've lost touch with nuance and context.
Yes.
It's now black or it's white. No, most of it's a varying shade of gray.
Yes, that's absolutely right. It brings one into the area of nationalism. What is nationalism?
Mm-hmm.
And in Cold Protocol with Lev Leviatsky as the Russian, who is Mother Russia. He believes in Mother Russia. The whole of his background is a belief in Russia.
Right.
But his conflict is in what Russia has become under the communist regime.
Right.
So he has this massive conflict that's played out with his wife and his American counterpart, who has a lover in East Berlin. And the myth shows, in a sense, what we are all trying to get to grips with in our own nations. Are we allowed to be nationalistic? And if so, how far? Is being nationalistic acceptable within a world where the internet, social media crosses borders and borders don't mean anything?
Mm-hmm.
International finance crosses borders. They don't care about borders, immigration controls.
No.
So what is nationalism? Is it outdated? What does it mean for us?
It's a fascinating world. One which I could enjoy talking to you about for many more hours. However, we are at the end of the show, David, and I want to make sure people know how to find out more about you, about the books, etc.
Thanks very, very much, Dov.
My absolute pleasure, as always.
It's been great. And thank you. Really, you do test. Okay, you can find me at davidbickfordcb.com. And for the latest book, to get for £5, you click on Cold Protocol on that website. And when it comes up with the coupon code, type in Berlin 1979, and that will lead you to Cold Protocol for £5 and the life of Lev Leviatsky, desperately sitting in the depths and darkness of espionage, working out his desperate fight for nationalism.
Beautiful. I'm excited for everybody to go read it. You'll love these books. They're fantastic. It's into a world that most of us have never really considered, some very real world experiences of what it was like back then. So I encourage you highly. David, it's been a pleasure and honor, sir. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. I always enjoy our conversations. And for you, dear listener, remember, those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of the tribe. Leaders who are committed to positively shaping the political and business landscape know that they must tap into what drives human behavior. I'm Dov Baron. I work with elite leaders across industries who are committed to soulfully guiding the destiny of the world, shaping business, teams, and leaders in how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe. Because unified, actualized meaning is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. Remember, we always need your help in staying relevant. So please go to wherever you tune into the show from. It makes a huge difference if you just rate, review, and subscribe to the show. I know that there are so many of you who listen on a regular basis, but you're not actually subscribed. That makes a difference. You've not actually left a review. It matters enormously to the algorithm, and that lets them know that you enjoy the show. And if you are a regular listener, big thank you to you for sharing the show with everybody you know, and we really appreciate it. Till next time, Stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about the ambiguity of your moral standing. Maybe you just step aside a little bit, take a look at things and realize that things are not quite as black and white as we'd like to make them. It's easier that way. I get it. That's how your brain works. It's looking for what's easy. But the depth of understanding is in the complexity. And in fact, oftentimes, it's not only in the nuance, but it's in the contradictory. It's in the things that you could disagree with overall, and inside of that, there is pieces that make you understand something at a deeper level. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, in your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.